A cabinet rebellion leads to Boris Johnson's resignation. The British Prime Minister announces he'll step down after more than 50 people quit his government. But who'll take over? And how will the outgoing PM be remembered? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is Boris Johnson. Well, they say a week is a long time in politics, but the past 2 days must have felt like a lifetime for Boris Johnson. A record number of his ministers and aides resigned over 48 hours, placing the Prime Minister under immense pressure. Now, Johnson was reluctant to step aside, repeatedly saying he would carry on. But on Thursday, he agreed he could no longer continue. The race to replace him will soon get underway. In a moment, we'll explore what led to Johnson's downfall and what it means for the Conservative Party. But first, Mohammed Walji has this report.
It is clearly now the will of the Parliamentary Conservative Party that there should be a new leader of that party and therefore a new Prime Minister.
It's been a dramatic fall from grace for Boris Johnson. In 2019, he delivered the Tories their biggest election win in decades. Less than 3 years later, he's been forced to resign. The pressure on the Prime Minister has been mounting for months, but Tuesday was the beginning of the end after two of his most senior ministers sensationally stepped down within minutes of each other. Sajid Javid and Rishi Sunak announced they were quitting and urged the PM to do the same. A record number of resignations followed as the PM's party turned against him. Facing a hostile parliament, Johnson was slammed from all sides.
Does the Prime Minister think there are any circumstances in which he should resign?
Prime Minister constantly tries to deflect from the issue, always tries to blame other people for mistakes, and that at least nothing left for him to do other than to take responsibility and resign.
The Prime Minister, though, remained defiant and vowed to carry on.
But frankly, Mr. Speaker, the job of a Prime Minister in difficult circumstances when he's been handed a colossal mandate is to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do.
But that defiance was short-lived. Johnson's tenure has been beset by scandal, and the misconduct has finally caught up to him. Throughout his premiership, many of his ministers have remained loyal to him. Sajid Javid stood by him through Partygate, but the Chris Pincher saga was just a step too far. Last week, the now former Deputy Chief Whip was suspended over allegations of sexual misconduct. The Prime Minister was made aware of the claims, but still appointed him to a position of power, claiming he'd forgotten about the allegations. For Sajid Javid, it was the final straw.
I continued to give the benefit of the doubt. And now this week again, we have reason to question the truth and integrity of what we've all been told. And at some point, we have to conclude that enough is enough. I believe that point is now.
Johnson says he wants to remain in power until the autumn. Some Tories want him out even sooner. The question now is, who will replace him? And how will the outgoing Prime Minister be remembered? Mohammed Walji, The Newsmakers.
So what now for the Conservative Party and the UK? To debate that are from Liverpool, Peter Wilding. He's a special advisor to Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. Conservative political commentator Andre Walker joins us from Windsor. And from London is Mete Coban. He's a Labour councillor for Stoke Newington. Thanks all so much for being with us. You know, Boris Johnson has long prided himself on not doing what politicians typically do, so many were actually expecting him to dig in his heels and to at least try to ride out this wave. But here we are. Andre, as a supporter, were you surprised?
I wasn't surprised simply because the resignation of 59 ministers is a really, really pretty huge number. There's no doubt that Boris wanted to continue. There's no doubt in my mind that he was the best of a bad lot in terms of leaders from either the Conservative Party, the Labour Party, or the Liberal Democrats. But realistically, being unable to form a government, is a pretty fundamental problem when you're Prime Minister. And I'm glad to see that people are now stepping forward. But it has to be said, when you look at the totality of what we have in the House of Commons, Boris Johnson was a huge hypocrite on COVID, but the rest of Parliament were big believers in perpetual lockdowns, destroying the British economy and going completely over the top, violating our human rights by mandatory vaccinations. When you look at Brexit, Boris Johnson was willing to stand up to European intransigence. The European Union made a really quite a significant effort to cause conflict in Northern Ireland, something that I think Boris Johnson stood opposed to. And I think that we were starting to see the green shoots of the ending of the crazy net zero policy on climate change, which has plunged millions into poverty. So on those three critical issues, I think Boris Johnson was the best of a bad lot. And what we potentially now see, not least with Keir Starmer, but certainly with potentially other leadership contenders within the Conservative Party, is a surrender to the European Union on the issue of Northern Ireland, a continuation of that dangerous policy of plunging people into poverty, and of course, a general unwillingness to support Ukraine and instead go along with the attitude of the European Union, which has been surrender, surrender, surrender.
Okay, Andre, just quickly, I mean, if he was the best of a bad lot, is the UK headed for worse now?
Oh, without a doubt, without a doubt. I think that the attempt to protect Northern Ireland from effectively an annexation is over. The leading the world in terms of Ukraine is over. Although, to be fair, the world is starting to come on board, so perhaps that wasn't needed as much as it was before. But I think most Conservative leadership candidates, and certainly the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, are wholly signed up to the green policies that have plunged people into poverty. We're looking in the United Kingdom now at potentially energy bills of £4,000 for an average household, £4,000 for an average household, something which is crippling to people and something which enjoys almost universal support in the House of Commons.
So, I mean, Andre, if the UK is about to implode then from what you are describing, shouldn't it have been Boris Johnson's responsibility to hold on and save his country?
Well, I think, look, I mean, I'm in a difficult position because I'm telling you that somebody who was a hypocrite on the issue of COVID, somebody who was willing to lie consistently, was the best of a bad lot. Unfortunately, people didn't see it that way. People believe that a genuine believer in wrong policies is better than somebody who's a believer in the correct policies, but a bit of a hypocrite and a liar. I don't think either of them are great, if I'm being totally honest, but certainly I think on the big issues, Boris Johnson was significantly better than any other Conservative leadership contender. And as far as the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats go, I mean, if Keir Starmer was a horse, they'd shoot him in the paddock.
Okay, let me get Mete's opinion. Wow, do you think the UK is as doomed as Andre seems to think it is?
I mean, where do you even start with that? I mean, that is certainly a perspective and one way to look at it. I mean, I think, Boris has completely destroyed any sense of democracy that we've had in this country. I mean, he lied to the Queen. Don't forget that. He lied to the Queen when he prorogued the Parliament. The sleaze of Owen Paterson. The way we dealt with COVID. Just again, he just has a habit of lying. We saw what happened with Partygate. He said he lied in Parliament. He's made it a norm to lie in Parliament, and I think the Conservative Party, today they stood up to him and they obviously sort of got rid of him. But the reality is what they've done to this country is irreparable damage. They've completely destroyed everything that is good about this country, and we've got a lot of way to go back to really fix some of the stuff. I mean, Angie was talking about some of the stuff on net zero and sort of the cost of living crisis. I mean, I'm not sure, how you got to that perspective, but partly the biggest problem we have around the energy cost is partly because we don't have sustainable methods of energy, and we don't have sustainable renewable energy, which is why we're in this place in the first place. Well, of course it is true.
I mean, that simply isn't true. That simply isn't true. The reality is the problem that we've got in our energy crisis.
Okay, let Mete finish quickly. Let me just establish where everyone stands first, and then we'll take turns. Go ahead, Mete.
I mean, look, firstly, this issue of climate change and reaching net zero is an issue of social justice. The reason why this is an issue of social justice is because we know that people from working class backgrounds particularly are more likely to suffer from the inconsistency of the energy markets. And we've seen that, we've had a war in Ukraine, which as a result of it, fuel prices have rocketed, and obviously with Russia's dominance in the markets. And what we need is much more sustainable methods of energy, so that actually people don't need to suffer it. But the reality is, look, there's no plan for this country. Some of the big problems that we have around our cost of living crisis. He talks about Brexit getting done. I'd be interested to understand what's been so successful about Brexit. Nothing.
We know
that it's taken 5.
I want to talk a lot more about that because it is a major point of Boris Johnson's tenure. But first, let me get Peter into the conversation before we move on to some of the finer points. So, we're hearing, Peter, that according to Mete, he's not the best of a bad lot. Boris Johnson was actually the worst that the UK could do. So do you think the UK is in for something better now that he's gone?
Well, it's impossible to say at the moment, in fairness. I think what we're doing right now is recognizing that Boris Johnson was a unique leader in not only Conservative history, but also British history. Johnson had weather on matters European, and the successful approach to riding two Conservative horses at once, which is what every political leader of the Conservative Party has to do, namely he has to ride the patriotic nationalist side of the party and the libertarian free trade horse, is exceptionally difficult to do. And there's no question that he do that in the 2019 general election. The problem with Boris Johnson is not his campaigning success story. It's the fact, as Lord Butler said to me last week, a former principal private secretary to 5 prime ministers over the past 40 years, he said something very telling. And what he said to me was this administration has no interest in government. It has an interest in campaigning and politics. And that's a fundamentally different approach to government that any previous government really did. And where Boris Johnson was exposed is that his lack of interest in government, his desire to surround himself by an uber-loyal group of cabinet ministers, was a fundamentally different approach to the way Conservative government run in the past. And, I would agree with Andre in a sense, is that the problem with him is that he was a hypocrite. He was a liar. Of course, he still is both of those things. And leaders sometimes have to be hypocritical. They sometimes have to be economical with the truth. But Boris Johnson was so outrageously incompetent at keeping these personal traits hidden in the better government of the country that ultimately and finally, after a hell of a long period of time, his colleagues woke up to the fact that they were not prepared to go on the news defending his indefensible changes of story. And they looked at themselves in the mirror and they considered themselves, it was impossible to move on. So to answer your question, we don't know yet. A great number of people are going to throw their hat in the ring. And the difficulty is, this time more than any previous time, there is nobody who can ride those two horses simultaneously, which seems to me that we're riding into a period very similar to 100 years ago when the Conservative government split over free trade and protectionism back in 1902 and went to a landslide defeat. And of course, the same period of time, 95 and 97, when Major went to defeat. But
let me ask Andre then, because I want to talk about kind of the immediate future. He has resigned, but it's summer recess, and he wants to stay on as caretaker prime minister until at least the fall. Do you think he'll get that wish? I mean, and we have to remember that for all of this mess right now, he did bring his party its biggest win in decades.
Yeah, and actually, funnily enough, I mean, Peter will have his own view on this. Both of us are members of the Conservative Party. My own instinct is that this reminds me of when Michael Howard wanted to stay on for quite a long time as Conservative leader in order to basically promote his chosen successor, who was David Cameron, give him time to go to party conference. Look, I don't know why Boris has decided to stay on, but I do think that there will be a very clear split. The people that are relatively loyal to Boris Johnson will want him to stay on, potentially to influence that leadership election. And I think that others will not want him to stay on in order that he can't influence that leadership election. That's my instinct. I don't know exactly what Boris is thinking, but I do think that we made a mistake as the Conservative Party when we didn't have two final candidates in the Theresa May election. We discovered, to our horror really, that Theresa May was a phenomenally weak campaigner when it came to the general election, somebody who was much more keen on hiding in a bunker than going out and winning. And of course, her 24% lead evaporated as a result, and she lost the majority. And so I think now Conservative members will want a fulsome campaign. But of course, with Boris Johnson in there, he will hugely influence the result of that. So potentially people will want him out as a result. My own view, I have to say, is Dominic Raab is a genuine Conservative as I see it, and he's the Deputy Prime Minister. I don't particularly have a problem with him stepping into the role. I'd be less keen if it was a pro-European, pro-lockdown, pro-green agenda person, but I don't think Raab is any of those.
Okay. Mete, let me come back to you. You know, there have often been comparisons between Boris Johnson and Donald Trump, where in spite of the scandals that the former U.S. president faced, and including even what happened on January 6th, people are talking about him making a return in the next election. Do you think, or do you even fear that Boris Johnson could do the same?
Well, I think the problem we have, and you can see it playing out right now, is certainly the Tories are allowing one person literally destroy the whole country in pursuit of his own career. And I saw Kwasi Kwarteng came out today and said, this has gone on for far too long. Where were you saying this yesterday? Did it take all of those events to happen for you today to just realise that he's the bad choice to be the Prime Minister? This is something I think the Tory party really need to look themselves hard in the mirror. They are a credible mainstream institutional party. Has been part of British history for a long time. And what they've allowed is similar to the Republicans in America, is they allowed one person, one individual in the pursuit of his own career, nothing to do with the interests of the people. They've allowed one person to really destroy our democracy. He's left us in deep, deep problems. We've got a really bad economy. The way they've handled the finances over the past 12 years, deep economic cost of living crisis. We've pretty much got a non-existent working relationship with some of our biggest allies in the world. You see, they spoke about this, oven-ready Brexit deal, which was going to happen with America. We're still waiting to see what's happening with that. So, I think he's left us with deep problems. I think the best thing to do now is every minute he remains in 10 Downing Street is a danger to our country. I think it does the Tories no good. He needs to leave immediately, the way he's conducted himself in the last 48 hours. And we need a general election so that the British public can decide what we can do moving forward.
Hold on, Andre. I'm going to come to you because I just wanted to finish that one point with Mete that I promised I'd come back to. A lot of his supporters are saying, we didn't care. It's not that they didn't care, but they said we weren't after Boris Johnson because of his honesty and integrity. It was about him getting things done. And he got Brexit done, or at least that's what was initially said. But you think Britons are really starting to see the cracks now in that pillar of what he said, was his real success?
The guy is a compulsive liar, and the Brexit campaign was a lie. They said we were going to get £350 million more a week for the NHS. That turned out to be a lie. They said that it was going to be great, and we were going to have all these trade deals that were ready to happen. I just said to you, look, America, which is our closest ally, we still haven't got a trade agreement in place with them to move forward. Actually, the trade agreements that we have had is like 0.08% of our GDP. It's taken 5% of our GDP, of our national economy. On top of that, you go to speak to many businesses, they're struggling with getting stockpiling on their shelves. You see what's happening on our borders. It's an absolute mess. Till this day, we're still yet to see any success of Brexit. And this idea that he got Brexit done, yeah, great. You left the European Union, but certainly you left my generation, which is younger people, in a much worse state than you did when you were growing up.
Okay, Andre, I can let you respond quickly. I want to give equal time to everybody, so go ahead.
Okay. Well, look, first of all, clearly Boris Johnson hasn't literally destroyed the country. But to use the correct English, whether he's figuratively destroyed the country, I don't think he has. Because first and foremost, I think that the fact that he was able to put through a workable Brexit deal was a good thing. We haven't made enough benefits of Brexit yet. I certainly think that VAT on fuel is something we're now able to do as a result of Brexit, or change as a result of Brexit, which we should have got rid of completely. And I think the next Prime Minister hopefully will look to do that. In terms of COVID, though, you know, if you look at the people that did figuratively want to destroy the British economy and figuratively destroy the country and figuratively destroy education by shutting schools, then I believe that Boris Johnson stood opposed to them. He wasn't as strongly opposed to it as he should have been. But ultimately, one thing that would have been literally destroyed was our right to not have mandatory medical treatment. Almost everybody in Westminster was in favour of that. Boris Johnson wasn't, and that was prevented. And I think that was a huge thing for British rights and human rights right across the board. OK,
so Peter, do you think, quote, getting Brexit done will ultimately be a legacy of Boris Johnson's or a liability for the Conservative Party?
Well, my claim to infamy in the Oxford English Dictionary is that I was the one who invented the word Brexit back 10 years ago. So I've got a little stake in the game. Get Brexit done and the typical meaningless three-word slogans is delusional. I'm not going to rehearse all the consequences of Brexit. They are there for everybody plainly to see. However, there is no question that the current Brexit deal reduces the size of the British economy over a period of time. It does put barriers to trade, substantial barriers to trade, to those who are exporting to the European Union. Meanwhile, we have a system where it's open door, smuggler's charter, for every Tom, Dick and Harry from Europe and elsewhere to sell goods into the United Kingdom without any checks at all on those that are coming in. So that is obviously plainly not a great deal. Get Brexit done was mainly a phrase which played to people's frustration with the whole post-referendum period. I mean, most people didn't even understand what the single market, the customs union were. So we are in a bad state, no question. Now, look, the Brexit deal is up for review in 2 years' time. So consequently, we should now be listening to businesses and individuals and find out from them what their consequences have been for their businesses and their lives from the current Brexit deal, and then, like a good government, hear them, find out what we can do about it, and then review that deal when it comes up in 2025. Not
Andre,
necessarily.
why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because, look, I love Peter Wilding. He's a good friend of mine. But at the end of the day, he's the last member of the Conservative We Love the European Union club. There aren't many left of him. You know, when Peter dies, we're going to stuff him and stick him in the Natural History Museum. The reality is, what Peter is saying here is that effectively we should go back on leaving the European Union. What I'm going to say to you is the big problem that Theresa May had.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to get in there, if I may. I have not said that, Andre, and so let us be very clear. I love you very much, Andre. We've known each other for many years, but, you know, your artillery fire is sometimes inaccurate. I have not said that. I'm simply saying a sensible government would know that the current deal is up for review. And if you were in my position, you'd say, okay, there are probably good things about it, there are probably bad things about it. And any sensible politician, statesman, would just say, when this comes up for review, we'll take a look at it. My motivations are irrelevant, Andre. I'm just telling you.
I'll tell you what. I don't want to get too far into, you know, Brexit. We're actually down to our last few minutes. So, Mete, let me come back to you because I want to ask, and we'll try to wrap with this, when you actually expect Britons to be able to vote again. Do you see an election being called sooner rather than later?
I would like to think so. I think that's the right thing to do for the country. I think, you know, the country was in a very different state to when we had the 2019 election. They obviously voted for Boris Johnson. You know, they haven't voted for the person who will come next after Boris Johnson. And I think it's the right thing to do. You know, we live in a democracy, go back to the people. But I think, you know, the Conservatives are scared because they know the irreparable damage that they've done to our country. I think you look at the results in Wakefield and Tiverton, in some of the by-elections, the polling. You know, I think they're in an absolute state right now. So I think they don't want an election and they've got a majority to keep them off that. But, you know, I was very glad to hear that the Labour Party will be putting forward a vote of no confidence in Boris Johnson because he must leave. I mean, the way he's conducted himself in the last 48 hours is, you know, I mean, it makes Trump look like a statesman. That's how bad it is, right? So, you know, we really need to get rid of Boris Johnson. And I think the sensible thing for the Tories to do right now, after all the damage that they've done to our country, is really do the honourable thing, tell Boris to leave, put someone interim, and then set the timetable for general elections so that the public can decide on the future course.
Andre, 10 seconds. Will Boris Johnson be back?
No, I don't think so. But I think he'll be around as a journalist, potentially a TV presenter. There's a number of new TV stations in the United Kingdom. I suspect that people like Rupert Murdoch will be talking to him. I think actually the reality is he complained about the salary for Prime Minister. I think given that this man can probably earn £1 million a year in the private sector, that's where we'll see him. Lord Johnson of money making. Okay,
Andre, I'm going to give you the last word. Unfortunately, we're out of time for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of you really so much for being with us. Our viewers, of course, for tuning in as well. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.